What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
All things continually lead back to serpents, dragons, fairies, Nephilim, and fallen angels.
In the distance looms a mystical mountain.
As Mike Heiser used to say, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important.
At its peak, a great fire burns, concealing the Prometheus lens.
This development of this knowledge that's being talked about within the mystery schools.
An ancient artifact said to reveal the hidden truth within a deliberately darkened world.
There's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
The Smithsonian, they caught wind of a giant skeleton. They would send their agents out to get it.
But it takes courage to move forward, to move out of the shadows, out of the unreality that we think of as reality.
We are all on the hero's journey.
Mankind has been in contact with and influenced by extraterrestrials.
Leave the Sitchin mound of bull feathers out of it.
Look at it from a different perspective.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Justin, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus lens to take a second look at everything. Well, today, guys, got a really science-y episode for you guys. I know that's a big word for a redneck like me, but break out your glasses and your pen and your paper, because today I have a man that has a very unique perspective. This man, as I said pre-roll, sits kind of on the fence in my view, with one leg in each world. We have the scientist PhD world and the pastoral world. So today we're going to pick the brain of a man that I found on actually a DVD, which I'll give a shameless plug for, Squatch TV. And this was Angels and Giants, the Watchers and the Nephilim. And this is the first time that I've seen this gentleman and heard him speak, so I had to try to get a conversation with him. But I'd like to welcome to the show Putty Putman. Putty, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Justin. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it was once I seen you on that movie there, I started reaching out and trying to get in touch with you, and it was actually a mutual friend of ours, Micah Turnbow, that introduced us. So Micah, thank you.
Love you, bro.
Yeah. Well, Putty, just for those that are not familiar, I'll give a little synopsis there, but just give a little bit of information and background, who you are, what you do, and how you've gotten where you're at now.
Yeah, I'd love to. As you hinted, I have a background in the sciences. And my world has straddled the science and church thing for a long, long time. I grew up in the church. My dad actually worked for the denominational office that our church was a part of. And so I wasn't a pastor's kid, but I did still have that kind of a lot of your world revolves around the church kind of upbringing. And I thought about ministry, but I decided that pastors didn't seem like they enjoyed their life very much. And I thought, there's more financially lucrative ways to be miserable if you just want to be unhappy. So, I don't know if I need to do that. And so anyway, I toyed with ministry, didn't really feel like it was me. And I joke a little bit there. It just didn't seem like it made sense for who I was. But the sciences have always been something that have really clicked with me, clear back to the stories about. Apparently, when I was a kid, I was the guy bringing a book. This is no joke. In kindergarten show and tell, bringing a book that was titled, I think, Quasars, Pulsars, and Black Holes. Right, so that was me. And when I bump into physics in high school, it's like something crazy happens, and everything just feels like it clicks, and feels like I found what I was made to do, and I was phenomenally good at it, and just it was a strange thing. It was a really interesting thing. So anyway, I begin to make my way into physics. I do my undergrad. That goes really well. Decide I want to keep going, and I wind up at University of Illinois getting a PhD in theoretical quantum physics. And I loved it. It was totally fun. Really, really fascinating stuff. I mean, all the science specials that you see on TV about how bizarre and weird the quantum realm is and all of that. Yep, totally. Like, that was my world. Like, that was what I did. And I liked it, and I was good at it. I was definitely one of the more awarded students in my PhD class, maybe the most in my class. I'm not sure. And I had a fantastic time there. As I'm doing the PhD program, I wind up in a church that is like the kind of church I never wound up in before. And specifically, it's a church that's interested in the Holy Spirit and just like, God doing very concrete, observable things. And all that was very dissonant for me. Like, that just wasn't my background. So I'm pretty weirded out about it, honestly. But I needed a community that reminded me I was following Jesus every weekend, because, I'm spending like 60 hours a week in physics grad school, which is not like the most conducive to faith, I guess. And so I spent about 4 years at this church while I'm doing this whole PhD, man, you guys are weird, but I want to be connected to a community that's bringing me towards Jesus. And I had lots of friends there. And so anyway, I attend this church. And then what happens 4 years into the program is I wind up going on a missions trip to China, where we are going to work with essentially like, they don't call them underground churches anymore. But like what we think of as the underground church, it's just not underground. So they don't call it that usually anymore. The persecuted church, maybe we'll put it that way. Work with persecuted church and train and equip just leaders and stuff there. Anyway, while I'm there, I wind up, God kind of, long story short, God tricks me into praying for someone when that like wasn't so much my thing. I kind of go through the motions of it because I'm like, I don't want to make a weird situation. So I'm not really believing in any of it. And she like full on manifests a demon. She's growling and snarling and like I'm like, what on earth is going on? And one thing leads to another. Actually, I wind up casting this demon out of her, even though I don't know if I even believe in that kind of thing. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't believe in that kind of thing, but nevertheless, like it happens through me. And that winds up being a pretty eye-opening experience where I'm like, oh, there's some things going on here that I was just not tracking with. And I need to kind of get my head around what that means and how real it is. And does it have to be this weird and messy? And how does all this work? And so I spend about 2 years as I continue and complete my PhD. I spend the next 2 years kind of doing my own grad school study of the Holy Spirit and all of that world, which is just fascinating and exciting and all of these things. And by the time I complete, I kind of found my way into a situation where I'd like started this little kind of laboratory so I could learn, because that's what I do. I'm a scientist, right? So I'm like, I need to find a place where I can figure out how this stuff all works. And by the time I completed my degree and defended and everything, that laboratory had turned into this swath of like 100 people that were just caught up in basically like what seemed to me to be like a move of God. And everything's happening. People are getting healed. Demons are getting cast out of people. Like people learning to prophesy. People who are like not walking with the Lord start walking with the Lord. Like it's all going. And I realized I'm like, somehow I stumbled into the middle of a thing that God's doing. And I don't know how I got here, but I do know if I keep going in physics, I can't do it here. Like I have to move a few different places around the world, do some postdocs, continue to build up my physics resume. And I don't see how I can do that and find my way to spiritual environments like this at the same time. Like that's just not going to work. It's not that physics and, God don't work. It's that my career path and, the thing that I'm experiencing right now don't work together. And so, after really thinking and praying about it, I decided, okay, well, I can't be the guy who left when God was in the middle of something. Like, I just wouldn't be able to live with myself. 5 years later, I'd wake up and I'd just go, like, what did I do? Like, that was the stupidest thing I could have done. I traded in on something God was doing because I was more invested in my career. And I don't know if I could live with that guy for the rest of my life. And so I decided, okay, I guess this is the moment where I hop off the physics train. It wasn't because I couldn't hack it. I was quite good. I could totally hack it, but it was just what God was doing with me in that moment. And so I hop off the physics train, not with any real plan. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll work at Starbucks. And what happens is eventually our church goes, well, hey, if you're not going anywhere, what if you came on staff and you helped us with this and that? And I go, really? Oh, wow. I wasn't trying to make that happen. That's fascinating. And so that winds up with me starting pastoral ministry. And I was on staff with that church that I was at in Central Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, for 11 years. It's a fantastic experience. We sort of started a ministry training school in the areas that I was doing things, and God really breathed on it, and it wound up going all over the country, all over the world a little bit. And then what happens is after about a decade of that, COVID lands and the Lord says, hey, we're going to go start a new adventure. And he and I had been dreaming about things and different ways to maybe put this thing called church together for a number of years, and became clear that's kind of what he was beckoning us towards. And so after a period of discernment and a whole process, we wound up moving out to Phoenix from Illinois, actually February last year.
One extreme weather to the other.
One extreme to the other. Well, yeah, I mean, I did my undergrad in Minneapolis, so that seems more extreme than Chicago even to me.
Right.
But we moved out here. We've been planting church since then. And it's been a lot of fun. I mean, church planting is hard work, and it's just a continual mess. You've always got lots of stuff on fire. But the Lord is just good. He's been so generous to us, and we're seeing such beautiful things happen. And it's really exciting to be a part of the formation of a spiritual community this way. And so, all of that to say, I am admittedly a very odd duck. Yes. PhD in theoretical quantum physics, a decade of pastoring, and on top of that, I'm one of these weirdos that believes in the Holy Spirit too. So I've kind of got like all these little niches added together in a way that's very out of the box. But it's fun. I enjoy being me. Yeah.
You're a mythological creature that should not exist.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, just for like the layman's, like me, like when I hear quantum physics, the first thing that comes into my mind is, time travel, wormholes, a lot of the, just the sci-fi imagery comes to my brain. So could you just, dumb it down for us slow people that may not understand or have a good grasp of what quantum physics actually is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a fantastic question. So, there's probably a lot of different ways to explain this. Maybe I'll kind of say this way. About the turn of the 20th century, so in the early 1900s, scientists started exploring how atoms work. And they found out that atoms in themselves act very, very differently than everything else seems to. It's like we've got all of this physics that tells us like, hey, here's how like physical objects move and work. We can describe how cars drive, and we could describe how electricity works, and we could figure out how light works and make lenses and all kinds of things. Like there's lots of physics that was understood rather well. But then once you started saying, well, how do atoms work? It seemed like they broke all the rules of everything that we knew up to that point. It was really confusing because it was like, wait a minute, like we thought we understood quite a bit, but this thing is just like, this makes no sense at all. Like this doesn't fit at all near anything else. Bizarro stuff. And that opens up a branch of physics that's called quantum physics, which is the study of physics in the scale that this particular sort of way of operating applies. Now, most of the time, that means you're working with like atoms or smaller, like the parts inside atoms, protons and neutrons and electrons, and then inside those you've got a whole bunch of other kinds of things. That's not the only place that it's applicable. There are ways you can kind of take those rules and stretch them over bigger things than atoms. And that's resulted in all kinds of interesting things, not the least of which like all our computers and so on. But largely it winds up being the study of all the strange things that atoms do. And specifically for me, for example, you may have heard of these, these machines where they take, these two like protons or whatever, and they smash them into basically the, almost the speed of light, in an attempt to sort of figure out like what's going on inside these protons. And so there's this huge one, for a long time, the biggest one in the world was right outside Chicago called Fermilab. Now the biggest one in the world is like over in Europe, kind of branches
CERN.
between, Switzerland and France. CERN, exactly. So like what I was working on was some stuff related to what's called quantum chromodynamics, which is the theory that describes like what's going on inside protons and neutrons and how does all that work. And so that was kind of specifically where I was working, and all of the stuff I was working on comes out in the kinds of calculations they're doing to, figure stuff out with those big crazy machines and so on. So I don't know if that speaks to anything you were saying, but that was the world I was living in.
Right. And it's, like I said, I'm a layman. I've just kind of, lightly looked into some of this stuff. I know it's a lot of math, and that was one subject I was never good at. So I knew that I needed more than a life vest to get into that deep into the pool, so I just stayed away. but I know it's macrocosms and microcosms, and the one thing I seen some guy talk about it, and he was saying that, imagine, because I'm an 80s, or 90s kid, but, imagine the Atari, you had all these little megapixel square blocks. He said, he said it takes millions and millions of those little pixels to make one little figure. He said, when you go in, you zoom in, and that's kind of what this is. You're seeing layers and pulling in and out and seeing like these different worlds, and that's kind of what it was made up of.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to conceptualize it. Totally.
But I know, like the Gnostics, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar, but I know like the Gnostics talk about the world being, a macro or a microcosm, and that the planets even line up, and that it's a microcosm of God Himself. That the planets line up like where, like I said, I'm not an expert, but like the certain planets line up to where your kidneys are, and it's like the cosmos is a body in itself.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Certainly familiar with that idea as a whole. I'm not well versed in, specific Gnostic beliefs, but yeah. So it's fascinating. Yeah. It's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
And you brought it up. So I want to throw some wildness at you. CERN.
Sure. Right.
Now that's something, especially, in the circles I run in, is a hot topic. And a lot of people, theorize that this is something nefarious, that this is not something that, they're not just hitting, colliding all these, particles for science and stuff. It's a big psyop and cover up that they're actually trying to open portals and dimensions and wormholes.
Sure,
And things like that. Have you heard any of those? And what's your take on it?
What's my take on that? Yeah, sure. I have heard bits and pieces of that. I'm not going to claim to have an exhaustive, sort of understanding of the arguments there, though I've seen a fair number of them. I think what I would just say on that is that, science. You mentioned about how, physics is expressed in the language of mathematics, right? And I think one of the things that's maybe not entirely well understood by people who are not scientists is that the language of mathematics is a highly constraining language.
Are you a hunter, hiker, prepper, or just someone who likes to enjoy the great outdoors? If you are, you know that good quality gear is hard to come by. Squatch survival gear is veteran owned and 100% made in America, baby. And their cryptid-inspired line has you covered. Everything from Sasquatch to Mothman. And whether it's a weekend trip, a day hike, or the ultimate bug-out bag, Squatch survival gear has you covered. Head on over to squatchsurvivalgear.com and use the code PLP10 for 10% off store-wide. Do you have a podcast or small business? Do you want to expose that business or podcast to thousands of people each week for an entire year for less than one car payment?
Now you have my attention.
I'm looking for sponsors of this show. I know you have seen and heard the Kevlar Joe ads on the podcast and YouTube channel. I can do the same for your podcast or business each and every week. I promise you, you're not going to find a better advertisement value for your buck. My contact info can be found on my website, PrometheusLensPodcast.com, or reach out to me on social media. Let's talk, and let me show you how you can grow your brand effectively and cheaply.
What that means is, what's interesting about science and about physics is it produces all of these interesting ideas, right? So you have ideas like, in quantum mechanics, you've got ideas of like quantum tunneling and things being in two places at the same time. And, and then eventually as you continue to explore, you can ask questions about other dimensions and portals and all of those kinds of things. And, first of all, one of the things that I think is often lost is at what point are we crossing the line between what is like observed physics and what is like potential physics, if that makes sense. So, for example, like extra dimensions are a tool that theoretical physicists will use to try to play with to see if it does describe something that's real. But extra dimensions are not something that there's any observable clear evidence of, or something that a scientist will go, oh yeah, we've got evidence that that's real. In other words, it's a calculational idea. It's not a concrete like reality, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of these, right? So once you start going down this direction, like, it's like, well, if we play with the math this way, we can kind of like make something that looks like time travel. And if we play with the math this way, we can make something like, oh, a wormhole might be a thing. Like if we play with the math this way, or a portal might be a thing, or whatever, right? So there's always in science, there's like, here's what we know is real. And then sitting next to it is like, here's a bunch of ideas that might have some tether to reality and they might not. And first of all, like scientists see those as two very different piles. Like they're not the same thing, right?
Tangible and theory.
Yeah, and even theory is kind of like maybe too strong a way to say it, right? Because theory is kind of saying like, well, I think this is how it works. It's more like it's sort of like, well, it's not like it's possible it might work that way.
Gotcha.
You know? So it's not even like I think, you know. And so anyway, the first thing I'll say is that what largely winds up coming up in these kinds of conversations is there's a bit of a confusion between those two piles. So it's like, oh, scientists are trying to do XYZ there. And often whatever follows that sentence is almost always in the like, well, I can't tell you it's not possible, but no scientist is for sure that it's real pile, you know? So it's like, are there extra dimensions? Well, I can't tell you it's not possible. I can tell you how to calculate if extra dimensions were real, but we don't know if they're real or not. It would be interesting to find them, but we don't have like some plan to crack open extra dimensions that we know are there. Like that's not what's happening. The second thing I would say is all the science that we already have done tends to put a lot of constraints around to what extent any of those potentially real things like actually exist. So for example, in extra dimensions, we know, for example, there are no extra dimensions up to this amount of information, right? It's like if we already seen them if they were real, but you know we know they're at least not real up till here. They might be real over there, but they're at least not real up to here. And all of these things are like that way. Like portals aren't real up till here. You know, pick whatever idea you're interested in. It's not real up to this level, right? And some of these things, and particularly kind of like the further you go and the more sort of nefarious it feels, some of these things we can actually draw boundaries on that go much, 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 much further than we'll ever be able to find it. So there are things, for example, where it's like, you know, there's a whole set of things around the like the quantum gravity limit we don't understand, and that results in a whole bunch of different theories like, oh, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe that. Well, if we wanted to even be able to get to the place where we could figure out if that was real, we'd need CERN to be like the size of the Milky Way galaxy. You know, something that is like so much bigger than Earth that we're like probably never going to be able to figure out how to do that. Like it's just like not possible. So anyway, all of that adds up to say that, you know, okay, like in Putty's like professional scientist opinion, do I see things there that I believe to be nefarious or concerning or, you know, that kind of a thing? It's real hard for me to think that. Just transparently, it is, because I'm like, oh, I get why you're saying that. It's because you don't understand how science works. It's usually my response to that. It's like, oh, yeah. You're just taking the science ideas and you're patching them together, not understanding that you don't just patch them together randomly. You don't just grab science idea here and science idea here and go, oh, this is what's going on. Because those ideas exist in the frame of mathematics, which is really clear about where they are and aren't real, right? Like math is a very unambiguous language. Like 10 is always bigger than 5. Like, you know, and you can have the idea of 5 and the idea of 10, but that doesn't mean that you can like say, well, 10 and 5 are the same. No, math says they're not. Like, no, but I want them to be the same. Okay, then you're not doing math. Like, it's like we don't edit math.
A lot of the stuff
Right.
they do is, in the very least, to purposefully throw fuel on the fire of these conspiracies in the very least. Because it's like, like you talked about, you know, you have the pile of, you know, can't prove that it's not real and, you know, testable.
Right.
Well, the whole premise, from my understanding, is that they're looking for dark matter, which is something that they've never seen or can prove that is even alive. It's just there's this huge blank space of stuff that matter should be, but it's not. So they call it dark matter, and that's why they're doing this, to try to find this thing that they believe to be there, but not have observed yet. And they don't generate until, the eclipse. And the Christians are already, most of them are in a frenzy anyway, but they decide to start generating on the eclipse of all days.
Oh,
and
sure.
They put Shiva, the destroyer god, outside of their facility. It's like, if there is nothing nefarious going on there, it's like, it's almost like I said, the very least, they're like, well, let's do this and see how many people we can just freak out. Let's just, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, totally. That's real. And I think there are some things that probably could be handled differently that would be unhelpful, or that would just change things there, right? But I think the other thing too that I think sometimes we miss is, like, if you're not a scientist, it's usually hard to understand how scientists think, because as they became scientists, they think a certain way, and the meaning that a scientist makes of a certain action or activity and the meaning that someone who's interested in spiritual realities makes of a certain action or activity are often extremely distinct and different, right?
Yeah, perspectives, yeah.
Right. So, like, I need to look into what you're saying about, like, statue of Shiva out front. I've got to take your word that that's there, right? And I'll say, okay, well, the first thing a scientist would probably think is something that, like, is completely different than the way someone who's kind of trying to view that from a spiritual point of view would be. For example, my guess is, just hypothesizing, I haven't even looked at this, but I know that Oppenheimer, the movie that recently came out, I haven't actually seen it yet. I really want to, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. Oppenheimer had this infamous quote, which is, I believe, quoted in the movie when they dropped the first atomic bomb at the Trinity test site. He quotes, the Bhagavad Gita, I think it's called, and he says something like, "Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds," right? Which is, he was personally into Eastern mysticism, and so, okay, that makes sense. But it's also sort of like, dude, this is the guy who made the bomb that could wipe out all of humanity. Like, that's actually kind of an appropriate thought if you're that guy. Like, what on earth have I just done? Like, I have just created death on a massive scale, right? And what a scientist would do is they would go, oh, a statue of Shiva is a tribute to Oppenheimer, who was an incredible leader in particle physics. So, like, that's the way they'll add that together, right? And they're not thinking like, oh, this sends a spiritual message, and like this, like, to a scientist, the thought that, like, oh, this is an actual spiritual being is like a preposterous thought to most of them. They're like, what, you actually think that's real? Like, there's no way. Like, that's what they're, that's the world they're living in, And so a lot of these things are sort of like, it feels to me like there's wires crossing, it's like, the meaning you make of that, the meaning we make of that tend to be pretty different. And so it's like, I think I'm doing A and you're here in B, and sides are fair. Like, it's like, I understand why you think A, this is the world I live in, sitting at the odd intersection. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally get how you see A here and you see B here. Like, it makes perfect sense. Like, I totally get that. But that's why, like, some of what I try and do is be a bit of an interpreter, both ways, back and forth, if that makes sense.
And that's one thing too, is because I know there's probably quite a bit of my listeners that are like, there's no way, there's nefarious stuff going on, because a lot of times we get caught in our echo chambers. If we're conservative Christians, we listen to Fox News. If we're more libertarian, we're going to be listening to CNN because we want to hear what we think and believe repeated. So that's what I love this conversation, because I say all the time in the podcast, it's all about perspective, and we're getting a different perspective in a science mind here. So I love it. And that's something I've not really took the time to gain the perspective of, because I don't have too many science friends. So thank you, Putty.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But one question I wanted to ask. Oh,
I was just saying, like, if we're prone or inclined to think about big organizational things being nefarious, right? Just in general, like CERN is kind of like the summit. It's the peak of the most biggest-y, sciencey, it's like, sure, I get it. Like, I get it, and so, I understand that world, and I'm not, I mean, there may be legitimacy, and there totally may be things I don't see and I don't know. That's all fair. I just know from what I've seen, if that makes sense. And
speaking of your experience,
Yeah.
Well, with your studies, was there something that you found in quantum physics that just totally blew your mind and connected dots for you and sent off light bulbs and just reaffirmed your faith and drew you closer to God? Did you have, I'm sure, you had at least, one or two. You care to share those?
Yeah, sure. It was my studying of quantum physics and in science in general. I've always sort of thought of it as, it's like you're studying the fingerprints God left on the universe when he made it. That's kind of how I think about it, I think what winds up happening when you dive into a field and you go that kind of deep down the wormhole, down the rabbit hole, is there are concrete things, and you do see specific fingerprints. There's all kinds of fascinating little parallels that emerge, right? Like, I don't know if you've done any study on or seen any, TV specials or whatever on, how protons or neutrons work, right? But so there's this fascinating thing where, like, inside the protons in our atoms, our protons are made up of three things that live inside of them. Three quarks, two up and a down quark is what they're called. And those three things are interesting in that we know they're there, but you can't ever look at just one. If you try and pull one of them out, then what happens is you wind up, by pulling it out, creating two new ones. And so you pull apart thing where now you have two particles. One of them is made of three of them, and one of them is made of two of them. But you can never get to, like, just the one, if that makes sense. And so, for example, it's really fascinating that, like, at the heart of every single atom that exists, right, there's at least one proton. The simplest atom is hydrogen. There's one proton, there's one electron, right? And going up from there, you only add protons. At the heart of every single one of those is something that is fascinatingly 3 in 1, right? Mm-hmm. You have, like, three of these things inside that make up only one proton. And there's three. It's not like the proton is one, but it's also three. But you can't pull the one out and separate it. So it's like, man, if you were looking for an interesting parallel of the Trinity, of a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit who are 3 in 1 and can't be pulled apart from each other, but that doesn't mean they're identical to each other. They are distinct. It's like, well, that's actually, like, believe it or not, of all the analogies I've heard, right? Like, there's analogies of, like, you hear, like, the egg and the yolk and the white and the shell analogy, or the, sort of steam, ice, water analogy. I think actually the best physical analogy is actually the proton, believe it or not. Like, that's probably the closest to the way the Trinity actually works. I should probably put quotes, but, so there are fascinating things like that are concrete. It's like God has put this unbelievable picture of himself at the center of every single atom in all of existence. Like, that's just fascinating,
Yeah.
But for me, I think the overarching thing wasn't so much any specific one thing, so much as it is this sense as you dive in where it's like you kind of you step towards something and you start unpacking it and you start looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, that works so much more fascinatingly than I thought it did. And you're like, wow, that is so, like, elegant is the word that comes to mind, usually over and over and over again. And then you're just kind of stunned by that for a while. You're like, wow, I can't believe how that actually works. That is so fascinating. And then you sort of get used to that, and then you peel back another layer, and you go, oh, yeah, now I understand it. And then you learn a little bit deeper, and you're like, oh, my gosh, that is so much more elegant than I even understood. And so what winds up happening is you sort of keep peeling back layers, and the more layers you peel back, the more you're just kind of like, you're just filled with awe of how incredible creation actually is. And you're just like, oh my gosh, like, the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, this is so crazy. And it's the kind of beauty, it's an odd thing, right? There's a beauty that is like, beauty is kind of fundamentally artistic in some way, right? It's very subjective. It's very like, why is that painting beautiful? Why is that song beautiful? Why is that landscape beautiful? It like appeals to something in us that's somehow artistic. And that thing kind of connects up with all the mathematical dynamics in science. And there's this sort of interesting beauty of the mathematics of reality that just kind of like you just kind of wind up being in awe over and over again. And, a lot of people, it's interesting that my experience getting to the top of the science thing, where it's like, yeah, it's like I'm working with world-class scientists. I've heard Nobel Prize winning lecturers and talked to the Nobel Prize winners after the fact and all that, right? Like, that's the world I was living in there. I'm presenting my research at the time at the most advanced particle accelerator in the world. Like, that's my world, right?
Are you a member of the All Access Pass yet? If not, what are you waiting for? Join the band of brothers and sisters on this hero's journey. The members community page gets you access to the private community, monthly members chats, and guest Q&As. Also gets you 48-hour early access to all episodes for just $5 a month. The All Access Pass gets you all that, plus exclusive members only episodes for just $10 a month. If you enjoy the content, this is your way to ensure I get to keep doing this show. This is your way as a listener to sponsor the show. So head on over to PrometheusLensPodcast.com and sign up. All right, guys, back to the episode.
I think a lot of scientists get a reputation of being almost like anti-faith, right? Like, you have to be an idiot to believe in that stuff. Well, my experience actually was this, is that the people who really get to the top are actually not so much that way, because they see all of this and they go, oh my gosh, there's like a beauty to this that I don't know what to do with, because like that is a kind of a compelling reason of thinking there's stuff behind this. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it works, but like beauty doesn't tend to just come from nowhere, It's actually the people underneath all of that who are not the world-class scientists, but who want to like be the world-class scientists somehow, that those are the people who tend to be angsty. And they're like, oh, Christians are all idiots. But that's usually like, my experience was like, when you get to the top, they're like, I had neighbors who were scientists. I knew scientists who had other faiths too. And it was always respected. It was always valued. Like, I had times where I was very forthright about my faith and, like, hey guys, like, this is what I believe, or this is what I can and can't do. And they're always like, it's so cool that you take your faith that seriously. Like, that was actually how it played out for me. And so anyway, I say all of that to say that there's this kind of like just elegance and awe that comes from that elegance that happens when you get to that point, and you're just like, wow, like, God, you're real good at this. You really know what you're doing, God. Like, amazing, and you just kind of want to hat tip him over and over again. He's like, wow, okay, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's just good, man. You just really know what you're doing here, God.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it winds up playing, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that was me with creation. Even as a little kid, I just looked around and I was like, it's symbiotic system after symbiotic system after symbiotic system. Everything relies on the other. If the trees were here and we weren't, we wouldn't be feeding them carbon monoxide. And if they were here and, vice versa. And it just goes on down the line all the way to the bee that pollinates the flower. And all of these things are codependent on the other. And if one of them beats, the astronomical odds of creating just one cell from nothing, it would just die because all the other ones didn't come into existence at the same time. I just creation itself was always my biggest proof of God and awe of God.
Yeah, there's extreme elegance in that same thing, in that same area. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, as far as your side of it, do you, in your opinion, think we see any traces of quantum physics in our Bible?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Are you asking if I interpret the miraculous events of the Bible as things that are connected to quantum physics? Is that what you're asking, or are you just kind of just asking more generally than that?
Well, I've heard you speak, on some other podcasts, and you said that, the miracles you believe are miracles, and that, yes, it is possible that God could use the elements that he created, but it's actually putting constrictions on a God that should be outside of his creation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, that's precisely right. So there's a thing that is coming up, kind of more and more, where there is a correlation that gets drawn between some of the miraculous events of scriptures and some of the behaviors that sometimes we see in quantum mechanics. So, for example, in quantum mechanics, there's a well-known phenomenon called quantum tunneling that, if you don't describe it with the technical mathematical language that quantum mechanics is, and you kind of try and render it into plain English, you say something like it's the equivalent of something kind of going through a wall, which is sort of like roughly true. And it's easy to take something like that and go, well, hold on, like we sure looks like we have examples of, Jesus seems like he was able to appear and disappear and maybe walk through walls or something like that, is that what's happening there? Or another one, like there's something called quantum teleportation, where it's like, it looks like a particle or something like teleports from this space to that space without going in any of the space in between. And, it's easy to look at that and go like, well, like Philip, like was transported in the book of Acts, is that what's going on? Right. This kind, I feel like I hear this kind of thing more and more frequently, and is sometimes that posed as a question, but it feels to me like as time goes on, it's more and more an assertion than it is a question. It's like, hey, quantum mechanics says this or that or whatever, and look, that's what's happening here. And I think what I would just love to say into that is, I'd love to say maybe 3 or 4 things. The first is, this is kind of part of a broader societal thing that's happening, not just even with Christians, where I think you see the same thing actually in kind of New Age type stuff too, where like New Age people are very dialed in on trying to sort of use quantum mechanics to back up the ideas and the teachings that they believe in. And what I would say is, well, as someone who's not a New Age person, I would look at that and I would say, I think you're doing what I would call authority hijacking. And what I mean by that is, look, science isn't attempting to describe the New Age. And the New Age does not actually follow the rules of science. And so what you're doing is you're kind of saying, well, this thing over here and that thing over there look the same. So I'm going to say that this is that. And I'm going to try and take the resident authority of science and apply it to New Age. Because we know science is generally believed. And so if I say that this New Age stuff is actually science, it's actually quantum mechanics, then, that's a strong argument that people should take it seriously. And I would say, hold on here. Like, science has definable parameters. It has things like reproducible experimental, things like science. There's a line where you're not doing science anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to be clear when you're on which side of that line. Right. And if you're on the other side of that line, but you're trying to grab something science to reinforce what you're doing, then you're hijacking the authority of science to validate what you believe. And I would say, be careful, because we could do the same thing as Christians, right? Like, we can authority hijack science and go, well, hey, our thing looks like quantum mechanics too. So look, quantum mechanics says that, the Holy Spirit can teleport you, like, like happened to Philip or whatever. Yeah. And I would say, let's be better thinkers than that. I understand it. It's tempting. Like, I get that. But we don't need to hijack the authority of science to try to defend what we believe. There probably are places where scientific argument is fair, but doing that way is not actually what's going on there. And beyond that, what I would say is, if you think carefully about it, that's actually not what we want to do anyway. And the reason why is, when we do that, we don't realize we're saying this, but what we're actually saying is, we're saying, look, God doing that thing that he did wasn't actually transcending nature. It was being really clever with nature, right? Because if we take something that looks miraculous and we recast it as science, we're taking something that's beyond the natural order, and we're actually locating it within the natural order, right? We're saying, no, it actually is in the natural order. And I personally, like, as a believer, I want to say that I think it's important that God does transcend the natural order. Like, I think that is fundamentally really important part of what we believe. That God does go beyond creation, and that when God acts, it's not limited to the rules of creation. And, like, isn't the linchpin of the whole Christian belief the resurrection of Jesus? Like, doesn't that fundamentally have to be transcended? Like, it has to be, because it's about, like, God is bringing an entirely new reality about that is not this one. And if we take the miraculous in Scripture and we reinterpret it as something that lives within this reality, we could be undermining the Christian story in ways that we don't even realize we're doing as we do it. And so I would say, I get it, man. It'd be nice to be able to claim the authority of science for our beliefs, but I think that's a short-term gain and a long-term loss. I think we actually wind up hollowing something out when we do that. And I would say, I don't think we need to do that. Like, there's plenty of good reasons to believe in faith. And one of the key elements of one is that it's like, I actually do believe there is a transcendent story, because that's one of the things that our, like, society right now is running into, the fact that, like, humanity as a whole, like, fell in love with science 400 years ago. And we've, like, tried to de-engineer society around the idea that there is a transcendent reality, right? And rebuild it around the science project, which says we don't know anything about transcendence. What we can do is put together the Lego bricks here and sort of build a picture from the bottom up. So science is a bottom-up thing, and transcendence is a from the top down thing, where it's like, no, this is what reality from outside in says, you know?
On earth as it is in heaven.
Right. As a society, we're very much just now hitting the limit of people are hitting the kind of like existential reality of the fact that the modernist project, which has eliminated transcendence, is ultimately one where you don't get meaning. That's the problem. Is you go, well, we've built this fantastic thing of Lego bricks. Great. Does my life matter?
Yeah.
You know, like, is there any purpose to all of it? Does any of it mean anything? Or am I just living a set of days where I wake up and I go to bed until I die? Is that really all there is? And the truth is if you eliminate the transcendent, then yeah, that actually is all there is. It's just like, I'm just living another day. The best I got is a sort of, you know, I can try and feel good as I live. You know, I can try and enjoy my life as I live. I can kind of try and maybe do some good, however I define that, which is ambiguous. You know, if you don't have transcendence, and what's good is then also up for grabs. And so, like,
and then there's no morality when you do that also.
Right?
If there's no transcendent God, there's no ruling stick, and there's no base for you to judge what is right and wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have all these like fundamental problems if you eliminate the transcendent. And I'll just say, like, as a pastor, when I look at society right now, we are finally at the point where people are feeling the pinch of the loss of the transcendent in severe ways. People are like, depression is unbelievably high because it's like, everybody's like, man, life is like meaningless. Like, what's the point? There's no point. And if there's no point, then like, this is all meaningless. Like, and so there's kind of like a by and large turn to try to find transcendence again. And this is some of why all of like the new age and all of that is becoming so popular right now, is because people are finally looking for transcendence again. They're looking for something beyond the modern physical projects. It's like, I need something that has meaning. I need something that has more. I need something that puts me in touch with something higher. Like, this is what people are looking for right now. So that is absolutely not what we want to give up on in faith. Like, that's what we need to hold on to right now and protect, not hedge ground on and be like, well, you know, yeah, sure, it's all, you know, God's not transcendent. Like, this is where we say, no, like, you're looking for something transcendent. You're looking for God. Like, he's the transcendent thing you're looking for. Let me tell you about him. Let me tell you about Jesus, the one who is transcendent, but came to us that we may know the transcendent. It's not even mysterious out there. It's revealed itself in the person Jesus Christ, who's also God. Can I tell you about him? Like, we need to have that now. We need to hold on to that. And so, yeah, so that's, I suppose that's what I have to say about that whole thing, if that makes sense.
Hey guys, got a call to action for you. If you guys are enjoying the episode and have not done so already, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and if you're listening on a podcast platform, please take the time to give us a 5-star review. This helps us to grow the show and to reach new listeners. Back to the episode. Hey guys, what's going on? I don't know if you've followed me since the beginning, but the audio and video quality has gotten a lot better in a very short amount of time. Now, I would like to take credit for that, but I just simply cannot. A good friend of mine named Jason has come forward and helped me with this whole process. He's been editing the videos, he's been bringing the audio levels up and equalizing them and compressing them, making everything nice and clear, and it's just been a huge help to me. But, so I want to give him props and thank him personally. And if you have a podcast and you are looking to free up a lot of time and bring the quality of your work up, you need to holler at Jason. He is the man, and he will hook you up. And I'm telling you firsthand, all that extra free time that you're going to have on your hands, you're going to be able to enjoy that with your family, hiking, just whatever, festivities you like to do and enjoy. And it's going to free up more time for you to do the one thing that you love to do, to create content. So I highly recommend you go check out Jason, up your game and your free time. Links will be in the description. That's plenty enough right there. I mean, yeah, the answer is outside of Pandora's box. It's not inside,
Yeah.
I love it.
And when you get in touch with it, your life changes in beautiful ways. It's unreal to live a life where you're in touch with the transcendent. It's beautiful.
Oh, definitely. And before I let you go, I have to touch on this one. The whole law of attraction, they try to, like you talked about, authority hijacking.
Mm-hmm.
The New Age talks about, you speak it, you proclaim
your
it,
own reality.
You manifest it. And then they even try to use scripture too. And they say, well, God spoke creation. He was showing you there. You speak it into reality. And even your Bible talks about it. Life and death lie in the power of the tongue, and not to curse. That's talking about, metaphysical and psychological, bashing yourself, to speak positively, and all these things. And I even heard Billy Carson, who's an intelligent guy, but he lacks, faith, and he lacks Christ. But he was talking, and you might be more familiar with this than me, but he talked about some kind of science experiment when he was talking about all this stuff, where they set up two boards and shot like atoms or protons at it, and that they splattered on the other side. But once they put a camera there and like observed it, that it changed its patterns on the wall, and like basically reaffirming this, manifest destiny, speak your reality, that showed matter itself changes when you watch it.
So the experiment he is talking about is legitimate. It's called the double slit experiment. And yes, it is true that when you don't watch something and you observe the pattern, and then you do watch something and you observe the pattern changes. And this is connected to one of the features in quantum mechanics about how observation fundamentally changes the system you're working with. All totally fair and legit science. To take that idea and then bridge that over here and say that's what we're doing, it's one of these same examples, and I see this all over the place, right? Another one that I see is, like, I've heard people make the argument about like offense and forgiveness with other people, and they'll use like quantum entanglement, and they'll say, like, if you don't forgive someone, you have quantum entanglement with them, and it's like you're tied to them until you let them go, and then you can be separate again or something, right? What I would say about this is, I would say, okay, I do think, I think spiritual dynamics and realities are real. And so I understand why some things are being articulated, with the metaphors of quantum mechanics. And I don't know that I would say that always even the thing that's trying to be articulated is entirely wrong. But I would say use a simile, not an identification. So, for example, right, if I grab another thing, right, which is the whole like forgiveness thing, right? So if you offend me and I hold on to that offense, right, there's this thought that it's like we're sort of like bound together in a way until I let you go, and then I'm like released in a way, right? Well, look, hey, I actually don't have a problem saying, like, it's like you're bound to someone. And then when you forgive them, it's like you're released again. And there is some kind of a reality
You're
like
not
that. I mean, we all
scientifically
know that.
intertwined.
Yeah, it's like we all know that, like, yeah, we all have, it's like this person was holding a grudge against their dad since they were 4, and that it affects the shape of their life. Like, that is a true statement, absolutely. But don't take that and say, well, so that's what's happening. It's like, well, you could say, well, it's a parallel would be there's this thing in science. Don't say that's what's happening. Just say, well, this kind of thing happens in science over there, and it's kind of like that. Like, just use it like an illustration. Don't use it as an identification. And I don't generalize with it. Now, of course, there's a second question, which is like, okay, it's like, you talk about like the New Age thing and speaking, how much are you speaking reality into existence or whatever? And there's, I think, people who land in all kinds of different places, even from a biblical worldview on that particular question, right? So, but I would say settle it with the Bible, and then wherever you settle it with the Bible, if you want to use science as a metaphor or a parallel, that's fine, do that. But don't link the two together, because what you don't understand is what you're actually suggesting. Like, when you actually say that you are being quantum entangled, what you're saying, like what I hear as a scientist is you're saying, okay, the action of an offense and whether you hold it or not is taking the like pound of matter that is my brain, which has like 10 to the 23 something like that atoms in it, right? So like we're talking about a billion times 100 atoms that live in my brain, and there's a billion times 100 atoms that live in your brain. And you're saying that those billion in your brain and the billion in my brain are all quantum entangled with each other because of this one event. Like, first of all, do you even understand how hard it is to get two things quantum entangled? Like, it doesn't happen accidentally. There's a reason we had to do 450 years of science before we even found out what quantum entanglement was. Like, it's really hard to get something quantum entangled.
We've only done it like for like a nanosecond, right?
It's really hard to get two atoms quantum entangled. And you're saying that there's a billion in me tied to a billion in you for 50 years. Like, as a scientist, I hear a statement like that, and the only next natural thought is like, if you actually understood how stupid that sounds, you would never have said it. Like, you just made a statement that from a scientific point of view is like, just makes you sound like, I mean, it just makes you sound like you have no idea what you're talking about, is what happens. And it actually eliminates any credibility from a scientific perspective. Instead of, if you just make it a metaphor, if you just say like, well, it's kind of like, there's this thing over there, it's like, it's sort of like that, it's not the same, but it's kind of like it. Okay, fine, we can go there. But like, don't do the authority hijacking thing, because all it does is actually alienate the scientists who go, hold on, I actually know what you're talking about, and I know it doesn't work like that. So now I'm not going to listen to anything else you say either.
Yeah, you've lost it all.
You just proved to me you don't know what you're talking about. Or you proved to me you don't know when you don't know what you're talking about. And so why would I listen to you about anything else? Like, how could I trust anything you say? So anyway, there's Putty's little soapbox, if that makes sense.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, Putty, thank you, man. And I really, really appreciate your time. And I hope this is the first of many. I definitely would love to go down the rabbit hole of the angelic hosts and Nephilim giants and get all that from a scientific point of view from you sometime when you get time.
Whole nother conversation. Yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah. we got many rabbit holes we could peer into. But before we go, let everybody know where they can find your work, your ministries, any kind of social media websites that you'd like to direct everybody to. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So I do have a website. It's called puttyputman.com, PuttyPutman.com. And I've published a bunch of different kind of like articles and stuff up there. I'll sometimes write about sort of faith and science stuff, or even quantum mechanics and supernatural stuff. That's actually not like the main part of what I talk about. I've got plenty of other sermons up there and teachings on all kinds of topics. I particularly love to talk about the kingdom of God and the Holy Spirit. But there's stuff about leadership up there. There's stuff about our church experimentation up there. There's stuff about just kind of Putty's random theories about where God's taken the church right now in this very odd period of time and all kinds of other stuff. So leadership stuff on all kinds of stuff. So PuttyPutman.com is probably the easiest way. I used to update that quite often. I've been doing that less frequently just because of the church planting. It's kept me very busy. But there's still like a backlog of a lot of great content on there. And then you can find me on Facebook too. I've got a public page on Facebook if you search for Putty Putman. I don't use it near as often as I could or should, I suppose, but I am on there, and feel free to find me on there too.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you. I really, really appreciate the time and enjoyed the conversation. Guys, be sure to check out his website and all his content. You just got a very small taste. And also, if you have not got this DVD, check that out. That is a great DVD. I highly recommend it. And you get to see more of Putty. He dives into the supernatural realms and the Watchers and Nephilim giants. It's a very, very interesting video. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in. Hit the like button, share button, and until next time, torch is high, guys. What's going on, guys? This is Justin from the Prometheus Lens Podcast. Have you head over to our website yet and checked out our store? If not, you need to. You're missing out. FOMO is a real thing. Fear of missing out. But if you go to the website and go to the store link, we got t-shirts, we got hoodies, we have tank tops, multiple colors. We even have a coffee mug to put your Kevlar Joe's coffee in. It's really cool. And we actually have 3 or 4 different designs and some new ones that just come out recently. Check some of these guys out. We have the classic logo tee. Got the logo on the front. Has a QR code on the back so people can see it, scan it, and go straight to the website and find us that way. But then we have this one. We have the look up for him, not for them, inspired by the Karen Wilkinson quote in the episode that I done with her. We have a nice scenic wood scene with the logo and a man standing here with a spaceship and a light beaming down at him with the phrase right in the center, look up for him, not for them. Same thing, has the QR code on the back to scan to bring people and find the content. And here's one of my personal favorites. Esau, incognito. Got the Bigfoot, the logo inside of the beard. And if you look closely here in the hat, it says, hello, my name is not Esau. Got the shades on, trying to blend in. But if you like some of those guys, head on over to the website, check out the store. All these designs, and I think we have another one too. It says welcome to the hero's journey. It has a guy with a backpack walking through the mountains. But all that stuff is available in t-shirts, it's in hoodies, tank tops, multiple things, multiple colors for you to choose from, and we even have a Esau coffee mug for the Kevlar Joes. But all that stuff helps support the show. That is a third-party vendor. People see these shirts, they ask you, hey, what is the Prometheus lens? And it points them right back to the show here and helps us to grow the show. Appreciate all the love, all the support, guys. Head on over to the store and check out some of the merch. Welcome to the hero's journey, the hero's journey.